Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jan.
It's 11 o'clock and let's get started. My name is Jan Schmitz from the Edmonton Pride Seniors Group. It's January 26th and thank you all for attending our weekly Aging with Pride discussion group for the 2S LGBTQTIA plus seniors and their allies. Thank you too to our partners Sage and the Pride Centre of Edmonton. Before I introduce our speaker, I must acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and we respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our lives. I must let you know that this session will be recorded for future use on our YouTube channel. If you don't wish your image to be recorded, please close your video feed. And now, and with great pleasure, I would like to introduce our speaker. Esjay Lafayette, he, him, is a QT BIPOC, born and raised in Treaty 6 territory. He is passionate about community service and has been with the Pride Centre of Edmonton since September of 2020. He currently holds the role of Executive Director. Over to you, Esjay.
Well, hello, folks. Very nice to see you and meet you. Was really looking forward to this time to connect with people in the community. My job makes it often. Michael and I were actually just talking about wanting to connect with each other, and being busy people, it can be difficult sometimes to get out and connect, and that's really the reason why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. So I hope to leave a lot of time just to chat and interact, hopefully be a small group so we can do that. So I'm going to start with just giving you a bit more of a thorough information or background about my history, and then how I connected with the Pride Centre. And then I'll talk a little bit about what we're currently doing at the Pride Centre and then where we're moving, and open it up for questions. So as Jan said, my name is Esjay Lafayette. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the current Executive Director of the Pride Centre of Edmonton. I was born in Saskatchewan in a little town called Rosetown. And I spent my first few years, 2 years, on a family farm situated in between Fisk and Rosetown, if you're familiar with the area. I am a trans man, and that piece of my identity is definitely influenced, I think, most of my decisions and kind of what led me to the Pride Centre today. So being a member of the queer community, that might seem like that makes sense, but as I talk more about my journey, it's really integral to how I ended up here in 2020. So I'll get there. Being trans, I was one of those people that was aware of my transness from my earliest formative memories. I don't ever remember a time not being aware of my gender identity. And so that really impacted a lot of my familial relations, and a lot of the decisions, really sort of any decision I ever made, gender took up so much real estate in my memory. So I was born in 1980, so I'm 42 years old. You're all, I imagine you're all adults at that time. So we'd made a lot of progressions within the 2S LGBTQ struggle, but it was still a very different time than it is today. So as I was growing up, it was very isolated. There wasn't, other than the rare reference in like a sitcom, some crude reference to like a transsexual, there was really no representation. It wasn't until the 90s that I think there was a lot more discussion, and the word even transgender, or it was transgendered at that time, was available. So it was a really lonely journey. And as I said, gender took up so much space. So like I said, I was born in Saskatchewan. My parents divorced when I was 2. And so when they divorced, I left Saskatchewan and I lived with my grandparents. And I didn't actually have much contact with my dad's side of the family. And that was actually because I knew about my gender identity. And when I was young, it was just that I'm a boy, that's it. And at some point, I realized that there was a thing called a sex change. And so it was quite little when I learned that word, and I went, oh, that's what I'm going to have to do. And in my little brain, I thought, if that's what I'm going to do, my family's not going to accept me. So I'm not going to be able to have a relationship with my dad's side of the family. So my father continued to try to have a relationship with me when I was a child. And I was very resistant to that. And it wasn't actually until my early 20s that I got reconnected back to my dad's side of the family. So when I'll fast forward kind of into my early 20s or my late teens, because of my awareness around my gender identity, and I did fortunately have a really affirming mom, and my grandparents were really affirming, I was able to medically transition pretty young, which is something that was important to me. So I started my medical transition when I was 17. And that meant by my early 20s, I was able to live quite comfortably presenting as a male. And what that meant was I sort of, my 20s onward were a lot of dealing with, I think, the trauma of growing up in a world that didn't recognize gender variance. And the fact that we as human beings were so much more than our gender identity or sexual orientation. And now that I've reflected over the years and done lots of therapy, my formative years were really impacted by this disproportionate amount of space that gender took up. It was the only thing that really mattered. So I was really involved in sports up until when I hit puberty. And then I dropped out of all sports because it was just too painful to have to face at the time, there weren't many integrated sports opportunities. So I would have had to play on a girls' team and I couldn't handle that. Doing in school things like band or any extracurricular activities, still the case today. If your gender is incongruent with what people perceive, you're constantly having it thrown in your face. So it was too painful to really operate in the outside world in any sort of extracurricular activity. So my 20s, fast forwarding to my 20s, I unintentionally went in the closet. Testosterone is really powerful. So I wasn't misgendered. I was just perceived as a cisgendered male. And so I spent my 20s and my early 30s doing a lot of healing. And like I said, I didn't intentionally go in the closet. It was just people make assumptions and I wasn't going to be coming out to everybody. So unless it was necessary, I didn't really come out. And so in my early 30s, I went into the trades just because I needed to make some more money. I did a number of jobs before that. I did some university, but I really needed to have a stable income, and I became an electrician. And I did that up until 2020. And that's what gets me to the Pride Center. So 2020 hit, and it was a really pivotal year for me. It was COVID-19. So we all were affected by that. So I think many people really reflected on the decisions that they were making, what works in life, what doesn't. It was a very reflective time for, I think, many people. That's been a common narrative that I've heard. For me, it was the year I turned 40, and I didn't really think it would have a huge impact. I've never had hangups around ages or around age or aging. I've actually, as a side note, as a kid, I looked forward to being an old man. I couldn't wait to be an old man. So I didn't think 40 would really hit me because it is still relatively young. But it is a milestone year. So it actually was significant for me. My mom also died when I was 42. And so there was this kind of piece of me that went, if I was my mom, I'd have 2 years left. Well, what am I doing with my life? It was the year of Black Lives Matter. And for me, that was significant because my dad, for a long time, I thought they were just Black, but I've recently learned in the last year that we have a lot of Indigenous heritage, and it was hidden because Black folks were treated better than Indigenous people. But that's kind of a side piece. So at that time, I thought I've always identified as biracial up until relatively recently. And because I didn't spend time with my dad's side of the family when I was younger, I had never really connected a lot with my Black side of the family, or at least in the formative years. I'd have, last 20 years or so connecting with my dad's side of the family, but I missed a big chunk. So I've never been super close with them. And I really didn't really realize until all the Black Lives Matter protests happened, how much I hadn't explored and how much sort of internal conflict and issues related to being, at that time, I thought, biracial. So I was reflective about that. And then also a lot of institutionalized racism that I didn't even really think about. And as I started to learn more about how oppression works and how systemic racism works, I had all these moments of being like, oh, I think that happened. That was a result of racism. So I started to go through a bit of an existential crisis and go into quite a deep depression. And I said, I've got to make some significant changes. And one of the things I've really been struggling with was work. I really like working with my hands, and there's many elements I liked about working in the trades, but anybody that's familiar with the trades probably understands they're an incredibly toxic environment. Aside from being queer and racialized, I just think that there's many elements of the way the trades operate I think it's destructive and harmful for really everybody, regardless of your identity. So I was becoming increasingly unhappy, and I happened to work at probably the worst site I'd ever worked with. I had the foreman who was the worst in terms of racism, misogyny. He was a loose cannon. He was going through, I think, a mental health crisis himself. So he was abusive to his workers, and we were working on a very remote site as well too. So it was at that time I decided I have to leave. And when I made that decision, I hadn't actually quit my job, but I was just waiting to talk to my foreman, because I did like, this was the last, I was transferred jobs, and this was the last foreman I had. I quite liked him, so I just wanted to give him a face-to-face. What's the word? What do you say? What's it called when you say you're leaving a job?
Exit interview.
Exit interview. Oh, I would love to have an exit interview. We didn't do those in the trades. Resign, that was the word I was looking for. I wanted to resign face-to-face. So I was out walking my dog, and I ran into that. At that time, it was the chair of the Pride Center, and we ended up talking. I wasn't close to this person, but we knew each other through different circles. And they asked what I do for work, and I told them, and I said, I'm actually thinking of leaving. And they had said, oh, we're hiring at the Pride Center. You should quit and come apply. And I thought, well, it's a totally different field. I know nothing about, at that time it was the ED position, but I was open to anything. So I quit, and then I applied, and then I was hired as the operations manager. And I worked as the operations manager until last February, and then I was the interim ED, and then I was moved into the permanent position of ED in October. So that's kind of that's the Coles Notes version of what got me here. But I should say, when I decided to apply to the Pride Center, it really aligned with that internal reflection. It wasn't that I just wanted a new job. I also thought, to me, it makes sense that the work that we do, if we have the ability to, I know not everybody does, but if you have the privilege and the freedom to do this, it makes sense to me that work is service. I really think that the world where we work a lot better if, no matter what the field was, we approached it from a place of service. And then, the payback is that you get reasonably compensated. I think everybody should be able to be paid beyond a living wage for what they do. But the primary impetus is you're doing work of service, and that you have skills that can help uplift and help a community. So it made sense to me coming to the Pride Center. I do have a lot of skills that I could offer. And I also, in terms of the 2S LGBTQI community, there's so much trauma, as I'm sure you're familiar with, within members of our community. So having people that can bring lived experience, I've done a lot of therapy, I've done a lot of healing, and I could bring some stability and support to the organization really was appealing to me. So now I'm here. If you have any questions about that, my formative history, I'm happy to answer them in more detail on the question and answer period. So now the Pride Center. Where is the Pride Center? So like I mentioned, I joined as the operations manager. And the reason when they hired for, they were looking for a new ED, the reason the board had decided to create an operations manager position is they realized that the position, this role really is too much for one person. And so they thought it's a really good idea to divide it into two positions. And there's more nonprofits that are doing that. And it does actually make sense to me. And ED's role is you're doing everything, really. And especially in a small organization, our organization has about a $500,000 operating budget currently and has had that budget for the last number of years. It's incredibly small. And so that means that you really are, as an ED, you have to do so many more things. If you're looking at an organization that has like a $25 million or a $6 million operating budget, they can cover the cost of having an operations or development manager, those sorts of things, administrative staff that can help take the load off the ED. Of course, they have their own challenges as well. So the Pride Center. I came as the operations manager, and a lot of what that period was is looking at operational deficits within the organization. Because there was so much transition with executive directors, there was a lot of institutional memory that was lost. Things like we hadn't had a business license for I don't know how long. And I discovered that as the operations manager, we were doing renovations at the time and we needed our business license. And then I discovered we didn't have a business license. And it's not really anybody's specific fault. I think that with an organization that's had such high turnover, it's really hard to have that information transfer from ED to ED. And also with a board of directors that have 2-year terms and no real clear direction of where that responsibility lies, that's how it ends up not being taken care of, and why you kind of need somebody dedicated to taking care of those things. So I spent my time as the operations manager project managing renovations that we had, which if you want to come down during our drop-in hours, I'd love for you to see this place. It's really, really beautiful. And then working on all those nitty-gritty operations pieces, taking care of things like fire inspections, making sure that we have streamlined processes for expenses, doing things like payroll. We didn't really have a streamlined process for payroll. So doing all those things, and I developed a good relationship with our finance team. And then as an ED, it was a lot of the continuation of building on those fundamental pieces of those operational pieces, and then doing all the extra things that ED does. So now that I've been in this role for a bit, I think the job of an ED ideally is doing a lot of community engagement and getting sustained funding in the organization. Ideally, that's really what you're going to have an ED focus on, and then you'll have another position to do those operational pieces or a lot of the nuts and bolts of the organization. So where we are right now, what we currently have operating out of the Pride Center is we have a partnership with the Family Center, which we've had for a number of years now, and we have a program called DISC, which stands for Drop-In Single Session Counseling. The Family Center has a number of remote locations. The Pride Center is one of them. And what they do is they place a Masters of Counseling intern student who does a 4-month placement at the remote location. And then they provide free counseling on a drop-in basis to anybody who wants to access counseling. If they want to continue with counseling, they have an internal system where they can onboard those clients and refer them to the Pride Center, and they'll go through a full questionnaire. And one of them for us is obviously they'll want an affirming physician, or sorry, affirming therapist. And then the family center does a sliding scale or a fee assessment, and they've told me that they don't turn anybody away, and then people can get set up with long-term counseling that's accessible for them. We also have our drop-in hours. So currently they're Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that's where we do a big thing that happens, or one of the major things that we've done is information and referral, but it's supported information and referral. So if somebody is calling about finding affirming housing, we have a list and we'll give out, or finding an affirming doctor, we have a list that we'll give out, but a lot of folks, they need supported access to resources. So in addition to giving that information to them, we also have contacts with many different organizations, and we'll either directly connect them with workers, or those workers will make appointments and bring them into the Pride Center so they can get access to various resources. That's everything from people that are experiencing family violence, housing insecurity, food insecurity, you name it. There's a ton of different things that come up. Community connection, obviously, in our drop-in hours. So we have the largest queer library in Alberta, which is run entirely by volunteers. And we now have quite a robust youth section, and then a section for little kids as well. We do youth programming. So we've been doing that since 2011, and it's really kind of it's been operating in its current form since 2018. And that's where youth is defined as anybody from 13 to 24, although we don't turn anybody away. But that's generally the group that, when they age out, this is as a side note, a lot of agencies, what happens is you have these youth that age out, and there's no real transition process from when now they're not a youth to adult serving or adult programs or services. So we make sure that 24 is not a hard line. That's why we expand it. And the youth programming, we had to really change it during the pandemic. So they became really versed. The youth program coordinators became really good at operating a system called Discord. And that's where youth come in every week, and they can meet up on it's kind of like a chat line, and they've got different rooms that they can set up with different activities. And they bring it, they do everything from bringing in speakers to doing board games, like online board games. One of the favorite activities is called Chill Chat. So that's just a time for the youth to connect. And then since we've reopened after the pandemic shutdown stopped, they've been doing about 1 day a month in person. So we just had one last night where they did karaoke. And we have it on Wednesdays because we're not open to the public, and that way the youth can have the entire space. They can be as loud as they want. It's really their space where they can feel safe. And then we do, this year, we got funding for the next 3 years, trans and gender diverse program coordinator. The person that's running that program was actually our old youth coordinator. So we have integrated our youth programming underneath that coordinator's role. And that is because 99% of the youth that come in, they do identify as gender diverse. We're really not seeing a lot of kids that are specifically coming because of their sexual orientation. And if they do, they can still be involved in the programming. And then the program coordinator, the trans and gender diverse program coordinator, is also tasked with onboarding or starting up support groups. So the Pride Center historically has had a number of groups meeting in the evening. And what happened is once the COVID-19 shutdowns happened, they obviously all stopped. And then since then, it's been really difficult to restart groups. We've been open to folks. We've reached out to previous group members to say, can you start a group up again? People really want it. And then another thing that happened is that we had some groups that became very dysfunctional. And that was just the nature of the complexity of trauma and issues that would come up within those group meetings. And so the program coordinator, the trans and gender diverse program coordinator, what they're tasked with doing is restarting some specific groups for some of those groups that were having a lot of dysfunction within the group. with some institutional support. So we don't have capacity to run groups, but we do have capacity to work on some framework and back-end support to vet facilitators, gather some external mental health support so that those groups can run a little bit more sustainably. And then we also have a gender affirming clothing program. So that is a combination of something we've run for a while, which is, it started as a binder exchange program. So that's for people that want to reduce the presence of a chest. And we started with just getting old binders, gently used binders, and then creating a library, and anybody who wanted a binder could request one free of charge. Then we got, during the pandemic, we were able to get money for gift cards. And that's relevant because a lot of funders don't like giving money for gift cards, but because everything was shut down, they were allowed us to do that. And so we got quite about a bunch of quite a large catalog of gift cards for the Quilt Bag, which is LGBTQ store in Edmonton, and then the Tickle Trunk as well, where they sell binders and other gender affirming wares as well. And so if people can't find a binder or they want a gender affirming wear that we don't have, then we will give them gift cards and they can go and get whatever it is they need. Then what we're adding to, so we've been doing that for a number of years, what we're adding to for the gender affirming wares program is a clothing exchange room. So it's an actual room that we have set up. It looks a lot like a thrift store. So people donate old clothing. We also have bought new undergarments, and then we have toiletries and things and makeup and a vanity in there as well. So people can access both the wares or the hygiene products, but also for people that don't have an affirming place where they can put on makeup or whatever clothing it is, so they can change here and they can get ready, whether it's for work or go somewhere else, or if they just want to explore. Some people that are exploring their gender identity, they really, they want a safe space to start testing the waters. So being able to change and then just be in the Pride Center, which is an affirming, safe place, they can do that as well. And then we also do a lot with newcomers, but specifically refugees. And that's through our relationship with EMCN, Edmonton Mennonite Center for Newcomers, and the LGBTQ newcomers group. So some of you might have seen Sarah and Bessel. They're the two settlement workers at EMCN. They did a presentation last year. If you're not familiar with them, Sarah and Bessel, they work officially for the Edmonton Mennonite Center for Newcomers. But their funding for that work actually only covers people that are protected persons or beyond. And a protected person is somebody who has a successful refugee claim. So they have an official status. And then beyond that is permanent resident or citizen. Refugee claimants, they're in this place where they're undocumented, basically. They have no official designation, and it's a really, really vulnerable position for LGBTQ plus asylum seekers, because the traditional avenues of support for those people would be things like churches or their cultural communities. And these are people that are fleeing countries that they are not safe to be who they are. So they are usually not connected to their cultural communities here. And most churches do not feel safe for people. So they're really reliant on the resources that exist through community organizations, or what Sarah and Bessel do, which is this LGBTQ newcomers group. And that is something they volunteer with on the side. They started that group basically for a need for a community connection. And then they realized quite quickly through those community connections, a lot of the folks going to that group were refugee claimants, and they would say, these are things that I need. I don't have food. A lot of people are mentally, they're struggling quite a bit because of the extreme levels of trauma that they've experienced. And so Sarah and Bissell, they take their knowledge from the paid work that they do, and then they run this volunteer group and kind of tie it all together, but remembering their funding actually doesn't cover that group. So that's one of the areas that we come in. It hasn't been official, although I'm working to make it more of an official partnership where we help fill in those gaps, creating community support, offering space and finances when we can to help the group out. The LGBTQ newcomers group, they've met almost every week actually since 2017, doing various things. They make food, they go bowling, like you name it. And then we also write support letters for refugee claims. So when there's a person making a refugee claim here in Canada and they have to appeal to, they have to go to the refugee board and they have to state their case. So they have to prove that they are legitimately in danger and also prove that they are part of the queer community, because there is a narrative or a suspicion that sometimes people are pretending to be part of the community. So we write support letters validating that, yes, they are part of the community. We give them membership cards, so they actually became Pride Centre members. And anytime they come in to visit, we actually have a file for each person who is preparing for their refugee claim. And we mark down, we make a record every time they come and why they're here. And then we initial it and we provide that with the documentation for when they're doing their refugee claim. So that's what we're doing now. Where are we going in the future? When I moved into the role of interim executive director, one of the first things that I thought we needed to do was create some clarity about what the Pride Centre does. So we've existed as an organization in some form or another since around 1971. At one point, we were the only organization, the only 2S LGBTQIA serving organization. Now there's a number of organizations in the city and also integrated within larger organizations, things like the Rainbow Refuge program. So we've got people dedicated to serving members of the LGBTQ plus or the 2S LGBTQ plus community within other organizations. So there's a lot more resources, there's a lot more support, there's a lot more visibility, and there's also the umbrella is a lot bigger than it was before. And by virtue, I think, partly of our name and our historical memory, many people see the Pride Centre as this sort of catch-all, like our name indicates. We kind of serve everything under the 2S LGBTQIA plus umbrella. And that is, it's too big an umbrella to address all those concerns. It's too much for one organization, nor do I think one organization should. And so what I started doing right away when I moved into the interim role is to figure out and start working on how do we actually tailor our services and become more focused so we can do a better job of meeting the needs where there are needs. And so the way I approached that was I found a consulting company and contracted them and got some funding to do a strategic plan. I have shared the strategic plan with Jan. I believe she put it in the chat, or she will, or you can contact her later on and she can send you a PDF document if you want to see that. If you come
I really tried to put it in the chat, but the account is limited. It's the account admin won't let me send a PDF.
Okay.
If people want to throw their email addresses into the chat, I can send it out while you're speaking.
Sure. Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Jan. And then if you want to come into the Pride Centre too, I can print one off for you as well. Anyway, so that strategic plan. So I contracted this company to help us do a strategic plan, which involves figuring out what we're doing, community consultations, and then also just a funding and an operational plan too to make things more sustainable for everybody involved. So we've started on that. But rather than doing just general community consultations, taking my own experience the experience of staff, and there's a number of staff that have been here for a while, either as staff or volunteer or students. And then we're able to identify kind of who are the target groups that are largely accessing the center and who we are best positioned at this point to serve. And so we identified youth, trans and gender diverse folks, and then refugees and newcomers, LGBTQ plus refugees and newcomers, because we're basically already doing that work, and that's where we have the greatest level of expertise, so we can really grow, or we can really capitalize on that work, and then hopefully grow beyond that. But that's where we have the greatest level of expertise right now. And then they are some of the most vulnerable group members. There's obviously other members of the queer community that are really vulnerable as well, but that's where we're best positioned to serve. So if you look at the strategic plan, the first step is community consultations with those core groups. And then the next step is the findings from what comes out of those community consultations will be brought to the larger community so they can give their feedback, and then they'll be going to their next stage. So that is going to influence what programming looks like at the Pride Center moving forward. It'll help me in applying for funding, so we can apply for some more targeted funding, sustained funding, get some sustained programs that are more than a year or two. And then if there's some stability there, we have more operational funds. So operational or unrestricted is money that we can just do what we need to with, then we can potentially grow, but we need to start there and do a better job of serving the communities, that the people that are accessing the center right now. So yeah, that's the synopsis of where things are at. And I think this is a good place to transition and then have some conversation.
I was very impressed, Esjay. I didn't see you look at any notes anywhere. That just came straight from your heart. It's very moving. Does anybody have any comments or questions for Esjay? I see Larry has put up his hand. Larry, please go ahead.
It's perhaps more than a comment than a question. But there will be a specific question, and that is, we have political representation at the federal level of members of parliament who are in the queer community. Can you talk anything about your connections with them? But the comment that I wanted to make was your personal story at the beginning. If you go back 20 years earlier, if I go back 20 years earlier, it sounds like my story. The complete absence at that time of any information, the fact that being queer was certainly not respectable. Indeed, it was criminal, it was evil, it was a whole lot of other things. And I think a message that we can give to the trans component of the queer community is how to get through that and how to persist. And finally, we've obviously got a long ways to go, but I suspect that many of the younger generations, for example, that we met at McEwen, I'm not sure they even truly understand what it was like to be queer in the 50s and 60s, and what, from your story, what it was like to be in the trans community a lot more recently than that. Thank you very much for a moving and informative talk, Esjay.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you very much. I'll answer your first point about your first question, and then I had a thought about your comments. I have connected with Randy Boissonneau's office. So I had a meeting with him and then his assistants, and there were HIV Edmonton was at the meeting, Edmonton Two Spirit Society, Is there anybody else there? There was a representative from, I can't remember. Actually, she's on our board, but they wanted a Francophone representative, so she wasn't actually representing her board. She was just representing, she was just Francophone representation. And the Salem, which helps support Muslim LGBTQ plus folks. And so that meeting was actually at Randy's request to help bring us together as queer serving organizations. And he is really invested in Edmonton having basically a coordinated effort. So he said in other cities, they've done a really good job of creating sort of a hub network, which has really helped with communication between organizations, and then also with getting more money into the various organizations. So like I said, our operating budget's $500,000. A lot of these other ones are very small as well. And it's very difficult, I feel like, to get any traction without having some more funds coming in. And then you're always caught in this loop of, you're so busy, it's really hard to kind of get out of that space. And so his suggestion at that time was actually like sort of the Pride Center, it's done under, the Pride Center is not at the top, but they're sort of central to this hub. And I'm sure many of you are familiar that the Pride Center has really had a difficult time publicly in the last few years. It's come out of under a lot of public pressure, and there's been so much transition, and there's been a lot of trust within members of community. So there was a real resistance from other groups, the other groups there saying, well, like, we don't really want the Pride Center to be at the head of that. And then, so that sort of stopped there. But he also said, he did a roundtable and asked everybody, what do you want? What can we do for you? And he gave each of us a chance to talk. And I had said, Randy, the thing is, you know, our funds, as any nonprofit, queer serving or not, it is so difficult to get sustained funding and funding without all these strings attached. So those of you that aren't familiar with grant streams, which is where a lot of our funding comes from, I would say the vast majority of grants are they're project-based. So they have a very definitive start and end. There's often a caveat that it's doing something different than what you're doing. And they usually don't cover many operational funds. So operational funds are things like your rent and your lights, but it's also admin staff, and it's my wage as well. So with an organization like us, now I'm trying to cover my wage and my admin staff, and arguably everybody's role is really important. But if you don't have a stable leader and you don't have stable front-end staff like your admin staff, and you can pay them reasonable compensation, it's very difficult to create any sort of stability. So I had said, do you really have any power to influence the type of funding we can get? And can you help us get sustained operational funding, and funding also that sustains what we're currently doing? So we're not always constantly trying to reinvent the wheel and pigeonhole what we need into what we're doing. And what he had said is, yeah, come and meet with me. You can meet with my assistant. It's actually just as good as meeting with me, and let's have a conversation. So that was, I want to say that was summer last year, kind of around Pride Month last year. My board chair was there as well. So after that meeting, I'd said to her, we need to talk with Brandy. And she had said, let's have a really calculated message, go in with what we want to do. And then the year passed, and it was still on my brain. And at the end of the year in December, when I was going through all my notes and things to people to connect with, and I was able to look back at the previous year, Randy's office was still on my list. And I also had a much clearer idea of what I wanted to do. So I actually reached out to his office when I was preparing for my winter break to set up a meeting. And I am going to be meeting with them next month to further discuss what we can do. So that's my relationship at that point with the feds. And then you asked specifically about the federal government, provincial government. We're in this weird spot with the provincial government, right? Because we have an election coming up right away. I have met with Janice Irwin and David Shepard, and I actually had a meeting last week with a representative from the UCP. They have a position where it's somebody who's a community relationship, community relations something, that's their title. But he is part of the community, and he said, I really wanted to reach out to you specifically and some other queer serving organizations. And it was a good meeting. I was very candid. I'll be candid with you as well. I'm really concerned about specifically UCP leadership and then a number of policies underneath their a number of their policies. But I also really think it's important that we're having conversations with people that seemingly, or organizations that seemingly have different ideas, and that ultimately, if they are the government in power, I have to have a good relationship or some sort of working relationship with them. So it was a really good conversation. His position will not be there if they don't get in. So I'd said, well, we should probably meet up later on and see what happens after the election. But I have spoke to some other organizations, and they said he has been good at following through on the things that he has agreed to. So it actually felt really good afterward. It's really nice to sit with people, especially with the UCP where they are right now, and feel like I had a real human connection and I wasn't just speaking to somebody toting the party line. And then in terms of that piece, the one thing that really stuck out to me, Larry, is I've always had a real fondness for seniors, period. Like I said, when I was older or when I was younger, I wanted to be a senior. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents as I was a kid. So I've really felt the connection, that intergenerational connection. And as I am now, I'm actually considered an elder in trans community because there's so many losses and there's not a lot of people that explored or aware of their trans identity when they were younger. So many people come out later in life. And I'm just personally really interested in queer history. I do really agree. I think a lot of younger 2S LGBTQ plus people, they might know it on paper, but they don't really understand, or they haven't taken the time to really understand how difficult it is, how many hardships were hard fought, and where we are right now. There is a ton of work to still do, but the protections that we have right now were so hard fought, and that is something that it's a shame. And I also think it's just such a loss of personal history. I think that it's so important to keep to remember and to acknowledge, and also give that due respect to folks like yourself that are still living, or those that we don't know their names, and the many people who we've lost. And then there are people that are still, they've lived through it and they are still not in a place where they can come out. So, and I also just want to say I do genuinely thank you, those of you that have persevered and have done the work that you've done. So thank you.
I see Pam has her hand up. Please go ahead, Pam. I'm sorry, you're not Pam, you're Karen. Yeah.
Karen, yeah. Yeah, I got two questions. Actually, just one comment. I assume that the charitable status is still maintained with Revenue Canada.
Yeah.
And that's good. The other question is that when we moved here from Ottawa back in '99, Glicky fell apart because the community had a lot of infighting, and there were different groups that tried to take over Glicky at that time, gay and lesbian, Glicky, whatever it was. And so it disappeared really. And then Pride Centre of Edmonton started up as an incorporated structure, not getting a license, but getting some kind of incorporation documents. I don't know whether those documents are updated from year to year. They are they? Good. And the other question I had is, to what extent is the Pride Centre, as it exists now, as a incorporation, protected from a community coming in trying to have a power vote to try to take over an organization? the reason was incorporated was to protect it from seasonal changes and having different groups coming in, volunteer groups coming in at different times, basically trying to usurp, do a Trump number and take over the company. So it's so in terms of operations and in terms of running meetings and staying so-called being open to the community, and yet at the same time protecting the company, the corporation, the center, from being taken over by a power group. Could you address that issue? That obviously it has survived, so I assume there must be steps in place to avoid things of that nature, that certain personalities who want to take power, want to take over control, don't run and bully themselves into positions.
Yeah, thanks very much. So your name's Karen or Pam?
Karen, yeah, Karen, yeah.
Karen.
I was on, a number of us actually were involved with that first resurrection of a Pride Center, and calling it the Pride Centre of Edmonton, Inc. Incorporated. And there were some thoughts behind that, but obviously there were just so few of us trying to do so much of us. and throwing in our own money and trying to make things work. It was like, it was desperate, but it had to be done. And we tried to get it off the ground, and thank God something came of it. So anyway, it's just what kind of, in other words, I'm asking, it's an organizational question, but how is this company, how is this this organization protecting itself from populism? Actually, that's what it amounts to.
Sure, thank you very much for that. That's through, I guess, essentially, if you had a group that was determined enough, they could perhaps take over. But that would have to happen, I think, through our membership. So in order to create some checks and balances, we've got our bylaws. And so there's criteria in order to become a member. Yeah. And then you don't just, you have your membership, you pay your membership dues, and that's it. There's a code of conduct that you have to sign. So they would have to be coordinated enough to, and have enough fortitude to vote board members out. And because board member terms are 2 years, they're not all coming up for renewal at one time. So this AGM, we had 2 board members positions that were up for renewal. So they would have to create a stink, and then they would have to not allow those board members to be reelected. Then they would have to be elected as board members, and there would have to be enough members that would actually vote them in as well. And then so you'd have to do that slowly to get rid of all the board members to do that. And then currently right now, our board member, the process to onboard board members is they meet with me first, because I have to work, they're my boss, and I have to have a good working relationship with them. And they also have to have some skills to help support this organization. So they meet with me first. And if I say, yeah, this person's fine, then they meet with the board and they do an interview with the board. And then, sorry, this is outside of an AGM, because you can become a board member outside the AGM. And then during the AGM is when you're officially elected or reelected. And then if the board agrees, then they will be onboarded. So I do think there is enough checks and balances to keep the institution safe.
Yeah, we started out by having a membership fee at $300.
Mm-hmm.
That was to discourage people who thought that $5 was enough to make it to be a nuisance. Yeah, says, no, you have to be serious about this. It's like you're either in all the way or don't bother. So it was a crude way, but we had to do something quickly and to make it work, and to only have people come on who realized that there was no money there. There's no there. It was that we need people working, and we had to invest ourselves. So that's how desperate it was at that time, 20 years ago.
Wow.
Anyway, that's just it's just a concern about the security and the welfare of the organization as a whole. That it's not taken over by any particular interest group, but that the mission of the organization, along with the strategic plan, all that stuff, follows a business plan, and everyone is working together and is loyal to the mission. Mm-hmm. And it's not a personality issue. It's a matter of providing service, and the service is for the community. And it's not in order to generate esteem and power and whatever else that people think is involved, and they want to. It's not a matter of ego. It's a matter of get the work done. Anyway, that's
thank you for that. Thank you for that, Karen.
Yeah.
Pretty wise words. So we're down to our last 4 minutes, and I see we have some more questions. So who from the Pride Center has put up their hand? And is it Michael? Is it Eric? Go ahead, please.
It was me. Just a couple of things. Thanks, Karen, for refreshing that history. I was part of that movement at the time as well, and it was difficult. One of the things that your conversation brought up was, and I think this has really come to the fore for me recently, seeing a lot of, is the concept of lateral violence. You see it in very, very many marginalized communities where you realize you can no longer punch up, so you start punching sideways. And I think as we try to make sure that we're an inclusive, healing community, that we need to recognize that. And when someone does punch sideways, rather than saying, ouch, that hurt, maybe trying to understand the trauma that caused that reaction coming towards you. I know it's not, it's difficult to do, but I think at times I hear some comments and I know that those comments are coming from past trauma, not from the current situation. So I just wanted to give the quick social work interpretation. Thanks very much. And Esjay, thanks so much. And last item is that because we have technical limitations today, I will mail out the strategic plan to everybody who was on the line this morning. And I will also be mailing out the toolkit from last week's presentation. And that's it. I can shut up now, I hope.
Thanks, Eric. I did send out the strategic plan to Joan. Joan, did you have any comments on that plan?
I'll just check to see if I got it. I wasn't checking my email. Well, I got you on the line though. Awesome story, Esjay. I can so relate to so much of what you said, and I'm so glad you're there. And if you could pick something out of the million tasks that you're responsible for, what would you prefer to direct your energies to if you had like more help and stuff?
Thank you very much. What would I like to do?
Like you're doing a ton of stuff. Like that's a pretty big plate you have there, right?
Honestly, when I look at it, my favorite thing to do is build systems. I really like looking at systems and fixing them. So my vision, if we could get to a place, is I'd like to get enough money to basically go back to that model where we divide this position into two places and I become like a chief operating officer. And then we have somebody else that does more of the public relations things. I can do that, but I'm naturally an introvert. So I get really exhausted at the end of the day with all the interactions that I have to do. And you have people that love going out, networking, doing that sort of thing. And so it'd be great if I could have somebody send them out, do that sort of stuff. And then we could work behind the scenes, working on grant applications and then systems, fixing systems. That's what I would love. Because my favorite part of it is like last night when we had the youth programming, the systems that I was able to create made this incredible event for the community members. And when you have those systems working well, staff are supported, volunteers are supported, and then you see this great community, this result of community connection.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're down to our last minute. I turn it back over to you, Esjay. Do you have any events to advertise or any last minute words for us?
Okay, events. We will be publicizing, if any of you are interested, when we do that next stage of the strategic plan, where there'll be the general community consultation, that'll be coming up. And then other than that, no, we don't have anything specifically planned for events.
I just knew we were going to run out of time today, Esjay. We haven't even started on talking about your transition. I would love to hear every detail about that. You know, what it's like as a younger body versus an older body. I'm so happy for you because that was even an option for you. It was never for me. It was always shunning. It was always a religious based. It was always, it was like horrible. And there was no grandma for me to ever go to. So I'm so happy for you. Thanks for giving me my 1 second of lamentation. And thank you, Esjay, for such an inspiring talk. And thank you to all of you. I hope that we will see you next week when we have Angel Sumka, who will discuss sexual health for seniors. You can contact us at agingwithpride@gmail.com. See you all next week.
Bye. Thanks so much, Aging with Pride. Thank you.